The ground shakes beneath your feet. The treetops rattle in the distance. The world grows silent, except for the sound of 2 heavy feet in the distance, drumming out into the night, drawing closer. You see a silhouette rear up on the horizon, a person who stands head and shoulders above the trees. No, not a person. Something like a person, but covered in snarls of wild hair, mouth full of glistening, sharp teeth. As the distance closes, now less than a mile, now only a few yards, now close enough to smell the fetid blood on its breath, you realize that you already know what comes next. You know what creatures like this do. Or at least you think you do. If the stories have anything to say about it, this is the part where the giant snatches you up and makes a quick snack out of your gourd. That is, of course, unless you're a princess. Then it'll take you away and wait diligently for some hero to come kill it. We can't all be so lucky. Giants do often seem to have a way of manifesting the vast capacity of mankind for evil and cruelty, embodying the things a person would do if only they had the power. It's an interesting archetype, and we will spend some time on it in another video, but I've been thinking, they're not all like that, are they? Some giants use that immense power not to harm, but to help. A lot of stories have them building, birthing, creating, and I think that paints a very different picture about the nature of mankind, shows a different outlook that you seem to have on yourselves, a markedly less cynical one. This kinder brand of giant is really interesting, full of stories and meaning and beauty, a far cry from the ogres and cyclopes we're used to. You might even call them big, friendly giants. Okay, normally we put a little sponsor plug here. This is where I mention it in passing so you're not surprised when it comes up later. But this time is very different. Our sponsor for this video isn't trying to sell you anything at all. Not even sort of. They're a non-profit organization called 80,000 Hours, and their entire mission is to help you find the most meaningful, most fulfilling career you possibly can. They've done all the research for you. They've made guides, podcasts, job listings, everything you could possibly want, all entirely for free, because they believe that when people are doing things that actually matter to them, things that make a real difference in the world becomes a far better place, far faster. It's still kind of hard to wrap my head around the fact that they're literally paying us to help you get access to this free tool that could change your entire life, but there it is. What a weird, wonderful thing. Please, take this opportunity. Who knows when it'll come again? Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. The thing that has me thinking about this whole creative giants topic is a little book you may have heard of called The BFG by Roald Dahl. If you somehow haven't read it, now's your chance to go have a look before we get into spoilers. It's a really fabulous example of this archetype because it turns the idea of big, evil, cannibalistic giants on its head in such a delightful way. In the story, all the other giants in the world are very monstrous. They have names like Bloodletter, Manhugger, Meat Dripper, Child Chewer, Butcher Boy, Maid Masher, Bone Crusher, Gizzard Gulper, and the biggest and worst of them all, the leader, Flesh Lump Eater. They love destruction and chaos and, more than anything, to eat. I probably don't have to tell you what their favorite meal is, but there is one giant who is not quite that way. One in all the world. The Big Friendly Giant, or BFG for short, is a species unto himself. Instead of kidnapping people and destroying things, he uses his size to catch dreams with his great big butterfly net, which he mixes up into unique fantasies and delivers through the windows of sleeping children at night. Not only is he friendly, but also creative. He makes things and uses them to inspire others. That might sound pretty novel, a big scary giant doing those kinds of things, but it's not really. Not quite. Humans have been blaming giants for their own creativity for pretty much ever. Throughout world myth, If you look, you can find a rich history of places and monuments named after supposed giant architects. Perhaps the closest to home for most of you will be the giants of the British Isles. Geoffrey of Monmouth, one of the key contributors to Arthurian legend, wrote of the wizard Merlin recruiting giants to build Stonehenge. According to the story, part of that effort involved moving stones from other monuments, which is interesting because there is evidence that some of the blue stones in the monument were taken from another, still more ancient site. It actually seems to be a pretty common story throughout the region. Giants were referred to in not a few tales as ancient builders. In fact, there's an Old English term for the wonders they made, enta geowork, which can be taken to mean the cunning work of giants. As always, if I pronounced that badly and you hated it, you're gonna love the rest of this video. It was a term used to describe a variety of old constructions, but mainly the scattered remnants of ancient Roman civilization. And with masonry like that, so impressive and so out of place, can you really blame them for fantasizing about its origin? Many of the locals wouldn't have had the education to know about the history of Roman expansion, so giants. To their credit, there's some dispute about whether giants in this context really means big people, or if it was just a term that means something like ancient ones. Either way, it certainly lends these old pieces of carved or stacked rock a sort of mystical quality, doesn't it? These are humans looking at the creations of other humans and thinking that it could have only possibly been done by something far greater. You start to get a feel for what giants mean to people, how you see yourselves in your larger counterpart. Off and away in the Pyrenees Mountains of Basque country, where Spain meets France, the land is dotted with barrows, dolmens, stone circles, and other ancient sites. And you see a similar phenomenon there, too. They have names like Hentilari, which more or less means giant dolmen, Hentilechi, giant barrow, Hentilberats, giant stone circle. The translation there isn't perfect, but the important part is the root, Hentil, which derives from a supposed race of giants known as Hentilach. The Hentilach were a great, hairy people who roamed the country there, shaping it with their strength. They built, oh yes, which is why there are so many ruins in the area, but they also loved to hurl rocks at each other for sport, knocking the peaks off some mountains and shaping the land in the process as well. They weren't just powerful builders and shapers either. In some versions of the legend, it was these giants who passed on the knowledge of metallurgy and crop cultivation to humans. Their time ended, like pretty much all the fabulous mythical creatures, with the rise of Christendom. As the new religion spread and the old ways changed, the giants are told to have traveled through a great stone tomb into the earth, never to be seen again. Only Olensaro, the last of the giants, remains. He's since taken up a role much like that of Santa Claus, bringing gifts to children at Christmas time. I suppose that only makes sense. We are talking about friendly giants here, after all. Well, we're trying to, anyway. I suppose creative and nice don't always have to be the same thing, do they? The Cyclopes of ancient Greek mythology certainly didn't seem to think so. In most stories, they weren't what you would call friendly, but they were important builders. They were sometimes said to be the ones who forged Zeus's lightning bolts. They were also said to be the ones who built the walls of Mycenae and Tiryns, which, at the risk of sounding rude, they do kind of look like they were put there by Cyclopes. Amazing feats of architecture, no doubt, but they also look like some huge person just stacked a bunch of stones and squeezed them together until they stayed that way. In fact, it's actually set a bit of a precedent. Cyclopean architecture pretty much describes anything big enough, old enough, and rough enough that you could imagine it being built by these burly monocular fellows. But creativity is more than just building things. Creativity is about genesis, the creation of things, and the role that you play in it. I think humans have an intuitive understanding of this, the idea that they can, and do, express their creativity in ways that go far beyond art, craftsmanship, industry, and some of these stories take that understanding and write it in large letters. Some giants aren't just builders, but they themselves are the material. For me, the most familiar example of this comes from Norse mythology. Before time, in the vast emptiness which they called Ginnungagap, at the place where the heat and the cold of the far distant corners of the cosmos met, they bore the first being, Ymir the giant. This set off a birthing period for all of the gods, the realms, and the many races of the cosmos. Ymir fathered more than a few of them directly, but I think the most striking aspect of his creative influence is actually the most violent, too. When it came time to make the world, Ymir became its building materials. Odin and his brothers, Vili and Vi, slaughtered the giant as he slept and used his body to construct the world. Says the Elder Edda, "Of Ymir's flesh was earth created, of his blood the sea, of his bones the hills, of his hair trees and plants, of his skull the heaven, of his brows the gentle powers formed Midgard for the sons of men, but of his brain the heavy clouds are all created." It's such a powerful, resonant image, I almost feel like I've seen it before. Actually, I may have. It's entirely possible. According to some sources, this is a much older and much more widespread story. Apparently across Proto-Indo-European cultures, there were a great number of variants. One of the oldest calls Ymir instead Yimu, and gives him a brother giant named Manu. Here, instead of Odin and company, it's Yimu's own brother who kills him to make the world. In every version of this story, one thing remains the same. The body becomes the world, a life given to the act of creation itself. But travel a ways further east, and you find what I think is probably the clearest example of this whole creation giant thing, the Chinese primordial, Pangu. Not only was he a builder, not only is he another case of self-sacrifice, but he's also the creator of order itself. According to some versions of the story, Pangu was born from the cosmic egg, which held within it yin and yang. He cracked its shell with his axe and pushed it apart with all his might, separating the two opposites into earth and sky, creating the two from the one. Balance. Some say that after this, he spent some time sculpting the world, digging valleys, piling up mountains, scattering the stars and the sun and moon into the heavens. But much like Yimu, in all versions of the tale, his greatest contribution was his death. When he finally laid down and drifted off, his body became the world. His breath became the mist, wind, and clouds. His blood became the rivers. His hair became the plants and trees. His bones the minerals. His marrow the jewels and the earth. His sweat the dew and rain. His muscles and flesh the soil and dirt. And, most interesting of all, his fleas became the human race. One of my favorite parts of the BFG is the scene where the main character, Sophie, first sees the giant herself. As the dark silhouette of the giant looms nearer and nearer in the night, she is, of course, terrified. But she also realizes something. It's not human, no, but as she thinks about it, the word she arrives at is person. Definitely a person. A giant person, maybe, but a person all the same. And as the story progresses, we realize how true that is. The BFG is not just a nice giant, he's a person, with his own opinions and desires and dreams, and of course, his own ways of expressing his creativity. By the book's end, he's helped to imprison all the other terrible, nasty giants, and he comes to live in the city and learn how to read and write. And the best part? We find out in the last few pages that he was the author of the book we're reading all along. Perhaps it's not quite on the same creative level as building the ancient monuments of the world or giving up your body to create the world itself, but I actually love how human this version of the idea is because it helps bridge the gap. It's easy to forget that although they can sometimes be monstrous and strange, sometimes covered in hair, sometimes with only one eye, giants are also not just beasts. They're not leviathans or behemoths. You dreamt and continue to dream of them in your own image. It's hard to believe that doesn't carry any significance for you. I like to think that when humans tell these stories about giants not as monsters but as builders and creators, they're seeing something within themselves on a larger scale, acknowledging the surprisingly creative capacity of creatures that are, in the grand scheme of things, quite small. I think these stories are a way of saying that your creativity, all the incredible things that you do, the ways that you manage to shape the world around you and outlast your own lives despite your size as individuals, makes you like giants. But it can be hard to feel that way on a personal level, right? Most people spend about 80,000 hours of their life just working, doing tasks to get money to pay for expenses. Don't you wish you could take all that time and do something a little more meaningful with it? Maybe make a difference in the world? I feel like people tell themselves all the time, I would do this if only I had the time for it. Well, there has to be a way to work your career, earn your bread, and still feel like the giant that you are. A better way to spend those 80,000 hours. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is, and this is barely a sponsor spot because there's no sell, no product, nothing at all for you to spend your money on. This really is me purely telling you that there's a shockingly easy way to make a real impact on the world, find work that really does create change. You don't need a degree, you don't have to do years of research, you don't even have to chance upon the right connections. Let me introduce you to 80,000 Hours, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping you make the most of your 80,000 precious career hours. They've been doing this for over 10 years, have already helped over 1,000 people find their calling, and have so many resources just waiting for you to lay hold on. With the help of hundreds of experts and academic organizations, they've studied tirelessly to find out what career paths stand to make the biggest impact on the world, and they've laid out how to access them as well. Turns out you don't have to be a doctor or a teacher or a charity worker to have a real impact. Maybe you want to be an AI safety advisor, working in a lab and making sure the robots don't get out of hand. Or maybe you want to make a career out of addressing climate change. No shortage of hands needed there. And if you're still right at the start of this and trying to understand what issues matter most to you personally, where you want to spend your time trying to make an impact, the website is loaded with educational materials as well. From a free guide that they give you right on the landing page of the website, to an incredibly good podcast where they interview experts from every field, to one-on-one calls with impartial advisors for those who've already taken their first steps into their career, this site, it's built to change your life. And I can't stress enough that literally everything they offer is free. Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. An absolutely massive thanks to them for giving us the opportunity to tell you about this amazing thing that they've created for all of you. Definitely one of the coolest sponsors we've had on the show. I really hope you'll give it a genuine look. Again, that's 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry. Just imagine it, reclaiming 80,000 hours of your life, turning all that time from mindless labor just to put food on your shelves to something you actually feel passionate about, something that creates real, meaningful, lasting change. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye.